Stephen A. Smith is being called out again, this time by crazy ass Keith Olbermann, excuse me. And I say crazy ass because Keith Olbermann, this guy's crazy. This guy's crazy. So Keith Olbermann is really angry with Stephen A. Smith because he is saying things about Biden that are true, but they are negative things. So I keep calling him Steve. Keith Olbermann has a problem with that. And he had some demands for ESPN in reference to Stephen A. But I want to show you what Stephen A. said. One of the things he said, which I think is part of the reason why Keith Olbermann is really angry with him. Here's one of them.
Is it you see it, I see it, the world sees it. That is, Joe Biden is, weak, frail, and cognitively he's out to lunch. Why can't Democrats just admit that simple truth?
Well, because he's the candidate, number one, that they deem capable of beating Donald Trump, which he's already proven, whether people want to admit that or not. That's number one. Number two, and more importantly, I'm not going to sit up there and label our president in those derogatory fashions. What I will say is this. I'm not engaging in ageism.
I'm not asking for derogatory comments. Do you think he's a cognitive mess?
I didn't say you were.
Do you think he's a cognitive mess?
I'm not going to say he's a cognitive. I'm not going there. What I can say to you is that I think there's an abundance of people who could do better. And I hate the fact that in the year 2023 that we have a bunch of liberal candidates out there that think he's the guy. And I'm like, what the hell is wrong with you?
For being straightforward, blunt, truthful, and honest. And you can't speak the obvious that Joe Biden's a cognitive mess. Of course he's a cognitive mess.
I'm not going to label, excuse me, I'm not going to label it that way, Sean. What I'm going to tell you is this. I'm looking at him and I don't like what I see. I'm not impressed with what I've seen. I've been very concerned with what I've seen. And the fact that he's going to be 82 years of age at election time, if he were to win an election, and he'd be in the White House until he's 86 years old, I think in the year 2023, it is utterly embarrassing that the liberal side has him as their best candidate. What does it say about you when that is the best candidate that you can give the left? That is ridiculous. That's not a knock against Joe Biden, more so than it's an indictment against the Democratic Party.
It took a little push. Now I got Stephen A. coming out of his shell. I was waiting for that. All right, now
that was mild. His criticism became more heated later on. So that was actually 10 months ago, right? So I'm going to show you some of the other things that Stephen A. Smith has said. Now, this was recently on the PBD podcast. The segment is called "Following Stephen A. Smith May Vote for Trump." Now, I didn't take it that way, but listen to this. This is another thing that he said.
Going back to your mom, when you're talking about on the conservative side. Your recent positioning with Trump has gotten a lot of people a little bit asking questions.
Sure.
Okay. So hey, the Democrats, what you're doing, trying to undermine everything this man's doing. It's not working. You're kind of going through the whole process, and he kind of Biden, all this stuff. What do you think, the strategy that they're doing right now, do you think they don't know that it's not working, or do you think they're convinced it's going to end up working come November 5th, with the day we vote?
I think they're convinced it's going to work. And I think that they're leaning on the 2022 midterms to buffer their point. You had certain Democrats who were supporting Trump surrogates. I'm sorry, they were supporting these folks and favoring, Trump surrogates during the 2022 midterms. And people were anticipating a red wave that never arrived. Mm-hmm. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And so that's what they're thinking about. The more we put Trump out there, the more we buffer support and augment support for these folks who support him, ultimately it will lead to our victory. That's how they're thinking. And I'm saying, no, not what I'm seeing. I think that he has damn near a cult following. I'm not calling folks cultists or anything like that. I'm just speaking metaphorically about how these folks are in terms of their love, their devotion, their belief in him. And they're not going anywhere. And then you got Hispanics who are supporting him now, according to the polls. You've got more black folks who are supporting him now, according to the polls. And even though they're swearing that the overturning of Roe v. Wade, along with some of the charges that have been executed against him, that's going to turn off white women, well, we ain't seeing that evidence. And so I'm looking at it from that standpoint, and I'm like, well, wait a minute now. Are y'all not paying attention? Because let me tell you something.
Pause there for just a second. So some Democrat loyalists don't like these statements that Stephen A. Smith is making, but it's true. So should we ignore the truth and just pretend like these things aren't happening and just bash Trump like just because Orange Man bad? Or should we tell the truth? And this is true. I don't see any of these cases being brought against Donald Trump leading towards a major shift within his base. Like, I don't see people that are Trump supporters exiting the Trump wave because of the cases that have been brought forward. I just don't see that happening. It's the same reason why, I didn't see people. There were some people who chose to continue to support R. Kelly even after R. Kelly was convicted. There are some people that are going to stand by someone that they admire and someone that they are rooting for, regardless of what charges are brought forward. But then you also got to think about the timing. Like I said before, don't you think the timing was a little bit weird? Now that he's running for president, in reference to Trump's business dealings, they could have brought legalities towards Donald Trump way before he ran for office, if we want to be honest about that. So let's keep it real. Now, he goes on to say something else here, and then I'm going to bring in Keith Olbermann because Keith ain't happy.
Charlemagne the God said it best when he said, Joe Biden is not inspiring at all. You almost get the impression that the Democrats who are pushing for Joe Biden to get 4 more years, because that's what they were chanting at the State of the Union address, 4 more years, 4 more years. The man's going to be 82 in November, and you chant for 4 more years. But you've got progressive leftists on this side chanting for 4 more years. I don't know if they know how embarrassing that is, okay?
Let me correct something here from Stephen A. Smith. I don't want anyone to be confused on this show. The Democratic Party is not left. The Democratic Party is still a center-right ideology. Like, they're not, like, liberalism is still right-wing. That's what people don't understand. Left, what people were calling left, were people who considered themselves to be progressive. I would go a step further and say left is further than progressivism, right? Left is socialist, is communist, is Marxist. That is what I would consider to be left. So this is the thing that does kind of bother me sometimes when people do bring Stephen A. on to talk about politics. And he's not the only one that calls the Democratic Party left, because it's not left. But other people call it that as well. So I just had to correct that there. The Democratic Party is not left.
Okay, but that's neither here nor there. The point is that when you're doing that, I'm looking at them and I'm saying to myself, come on now, this is utterly ridiculous. You think this is going to get it done. But I tell you what I'm starting to suspect. They don't know if Joe's going to last 4 more years. And all they care about is that he gets through Election Day.
There you go.
And then after that, who's the next in line? It's Kamala Harris. And
everyone needs to think about that too. We don't even know if Joe is going to make it tomorrow. I'm just being honest. We don't know how long Joe Biden is going to last, but the reality is, I think what Stephen A. Smith said there is correct. They're just trying to get him through the election, and then he can always step down. He could step down after the convention. He can step down. He can step down after he wins and say, all right, that's it for me, dudes. Kamala's now president of the United States. Now, we all know Joe Biden has been terrible in reference to foreign policy. We know he's a warmonger. We know he supports Israel's genocide, no matter what he says. But I also want you to think about the fact that Kamala Harris is also going to be horrible in reference to foreign policy. This is why I say we should not support the two-party system, that and the fact that there's corporate money attached to both of these political parties. Now, there are people out there running that do have a correct position in reference to Israel and Gaza. I think our best chance is someone like Jill Stein, because she is going to get more ballot access, and she has the most ballot access right now in the country of the third party and independent candidates. Just the reality. But he's right about that. Kamala's next in line.
And I think that's how folks are thinking. But my problem with it is, again, we're capitalists. We like competition. What happened to competing with him and winning? What's all the lawfare about? One charge after another. You got Letitia James and the New York Attorney General in New York. You've got you got the folks in Georgia with Fannie Willis and others. You've got Mar-a-Lago situation. You got we're really, really, really going to have a trial about hush money to a former porn star. That's what we're doing. That's what we're doing now. I'm like, are you kidding me? Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not advocating that anybody should be above the law at any time. What I am saying is, he's the president of the United States, the former president of the United States. You talk to us about Russian collusion. You talk to us about a bevy of things over the years. Man still running. Four indictments, 91 counts, and the man gets more campaign dollars. Climbing in the polls, okay? And last time I checked, he still ain't been in cuffs. He still ain't been put behind bars. And he's the presumptive GOP nominee. You can't stop him. You cannot stop him. And
so what's incorrect there about what he said? I mean, this is for all the people that laugh and say, well, I can't believe people would vote for Donald Trump considering he has all these charges against him. I can't believe Donald Trump is beating Joe Biden in the polls considering he has all these charges against him. Well, the question that you should really ask is, how did Joe Biden really screw this up? Number one issue is the economy. I'll let him finish here and then I'll take you to Keith Olbermann.
So for me, I find myself ashamed of the Democratic Party for their lack of a competitive fervor. You had since 2016 to come up with somebody else, and you still can't do it. That is pathetic. It is pathetic. And it is no excuse for it whatsoever. It is 2024. In 8 years, you should have been able to find somebody that can compete with this man other than a soon-to-be 82-year-old incumbent.
Well, let me ask you this, though.
Okay, let's come out of that. We're going to go into what Keith Olbermann said. Regardless, even if they found somebody else, at the end of the day, I mean, they're going to pick someone else that is establishment. They're going to pick someone else that supports the military-industrial complex and that supports Wall Street. That's who the DNC is going to select. The GOP would too. That's who they're going to select. Now, Keith Olbermann is not happy with the statements that Stephen A. Smith has been making. We're not going to read all this. We're just going to take you right to his video here because he actually has some demands. Boy, I tell you, this guy's crazy. Remember, Keith Olbermann actually was a sports commentator, right? So just keep that in mind. Listen to this.
Here are the headlines from the Tuesday edition of the Countdown podcast, now live wherever you podcast. ESPN must either silence its top figure, Stephen A. Smith, or fire Stephen A. Smith. Here are the headlines from the Tuesday edition of the Countdown podcast, now live wherever you podcast. ESPN must either silence its top figure, Stephen A. Smith, or fire Stephen A. Smith. Here are the...
So... I don't know why I hit backwards again. So why is Keith Olbermann making demands to ESPN about who they should remove from the network? This is the same guy that went off crazy towards Angel Reese during the basketball game. Remember when Angel Reese was facing Caitlin Clark last year in the championship game or the playoff game for the women's college basketball? Remember that? He went off on her on Twitter and called her all kind of names, and it was just very disrespectful. Actually, matter of fact, now that I think about it, every time someone black pisses off Keith Olbermann always comes in to rage towards black people. It's just something that I've noticed with him, right? So let's try this again.
Sorry. Headlines from the Tuesday edition of the Countdown podcast, now live wherever you podcast. ESPN must either silence its top figure, Stephen A. Smith, or fire Stephen A. Smith. Once upon a time, a long time ago, you could be on one television channel talking benignly about good old sports, while you were also on another television channel talking about party politics, partisanship, and even endorsing one presidential candidate over another. A long time ago. I know this because I used to do it a long time ago. A long time ago, like 2010. But this is no longer 2010. So why is ESPN letting Stephen A. Smith go on Fox News and campaign for Donald Trump?
So let's pause here for just a second. First of all, let him go on to Fox News. Let him. I think Stephen A. Smith is a grown man and he can decide what platforms he wants to go on to. So there's that. Two, Stephen A. Smith has also been on CNN. He's not just appearing on Fox News. We played some of the CNN clips on the show. So he's been on CNN as well. We just played part where he was on the PBD podcast. I don't know where you consider them to be politically. And also, how is he campaigning for Donald Trump? So you see the exaggeration that comes from Keith Olbermann? Guy's like a walking infomercial or something. I don't know.
They either have to silence him or they have to get rid of him. All that plus the news headlines.
Did you hear this? Play one back. So this guy is calling for censorship.
For Donald Trump. They either have to silence him or they have to get rid of him.
So Keith Olbermann is calling for ESPN to censor Stephen A. Smith. And it appears like he doesn't want it. He wants ESPN to make it so that he cannot appear on any other platforms. That would have to be in the contract. Like you can't just go up to him and say, I don't want you to appear on any other platforms. That would have to be in Stephen A.'s contract, which obviously is not if he's appearing on other platforms. So there's that. And then two, so censor him or fire him. I believe Keith used to work for ESPN at one point, I think. Like it just like who is this guy? Like, why do you I see kids in the house. Kid from Heartlands Media says Olbermann is a washed fool. Zombie in the air. Did Trump sleep with his wife or something? I don't think so. I think he finishes here. Oh my God.
All that plus the news headlines. Trump now thinks that his thugs should be, to quote his online post, allowed to protest at the front steps of courthouses all over the country. Trump mobs going up the steps of government facilities. Why does that sound so vaguely familiar? Trump's latest stochastic threat on the Tuesday Countdown podcast, now live wherever you podcast.
So it's obvious to me that Keith Olbermann still has Trump derangement syndrome. And he's still obviously out there tap dancing for Joe Biden as well. Now, there's one more piece here from this podcast I want you to hear too. And I think this is another thing that Olbermann may have had a problem with. Listen to this.
They say 81 million plus people voted for Joe Biden. I don't believe that for 1 second. I believe 81 plus million people voted against Donald Trump.
Oh, and there it is. 81 million people voted against Donald Trump. There it is, folks.
They didn't want him there. They couldn't take it anymore because he was so unsettling. And that's the difference. Big boy, big rules. A lot of people might feel differently.
Yeah.
That's where I'm at with it.
No, I respect that. And I think a part of why would 81 million people feel that way? Let's go through what is the easiest emotion to manipulate people with. What is the easiest emotion? It's very simple. Fear sharpens listening.
Yep.
If you can sell an entire congregation, you ever gone to a pastor, he gets up and he says, if you don't get baptized today, you're going to hell. And here's what hell looks like. Oh my God, I'm getting baptized right now, right? So they sold Trump as the second coming of the guy from Germany, and many Americans who don't read, who don't follow politics, who live a simple life, who these guys are trying to pay their bills. They're trying to watch a game on Sunday, you know, maybe having a barbecue. They're trying to do basically, they don't have time to go read all the stuff that's going on. And they're like, you know what? I don't want to deal with any of this stuff. The part that I give the left a lot of credit to is the following. When COVID happened and everybody knew it came from China, U.S. could have done what they did during 9/11 and been united against China, but the Democrats became united against Trump. And they...
Let me just pause there for a second because he goes into this craziness right here. Because what I will say there again, the Democrats are not left. You know what? I'm going to work on that. Be Easy actually made my last design. I'm going to ask Be Easy if he can make a design for me that says the Democrats are not left or something like that, because he made that other design. That was really cool. Because I need a t-shirt that says something like that, because I'm tired of explaining this. I'm tired of explaining this. The Democratic Party has co-opted the word left, just like they co-opted BLM, just like they co-opted the word progressive, right? But they are really not in theory. So Stephen A had like some really good points there. I don't agree with him on everything. I don't agree with him that Gavin Newsom should be a better pick or whatever. I just don't. I'm not for the establishment candidates. I'm not for the Democratic Party. I'm not for the Republican Party. Like, I have done this thing. I did this song and dance. My last chance was with Bernie Sanders, Bernie 2020. And I think we all see what happened with that. So my thing is, anybody talking about these issues and not calling out the corruption in the system, not calling out the issues with money, not calling for some type of demands, they're not actually acknowledging the problem with the system. They're acknowledging the problem with individual people. And you can always replace those people with other people. But if they're going into the same system, they're going to run into the same problem in that two-party system, that umbrella. So I think it's really important that we look for people to call out the corruption within the system.